Hello, Caitlin Moran. What a complete joy and welcome to the site. Can I see your fantastic book?
Yes, you can. There it is. It's hardback. It's solid. You can use that to prop up a wonky table. In an emergency, you could use it as a chopping board. I wouldn't mind if you need to. It's fine. Let's use it as usefully as possible.
It's called More Than a Woman and it is a piece of genius. I spent the last 2 days reading it and it's moving and obviously funny. And it's a follow-up to How to Be a Woman, which was 10 years ago.
I know, that's scary, isn't it? That's when you get to our age, you start realising, oh my God, I'm remembering things that happened 10 or 20 years ago. All these anniversaries keep coming around. Yeah, it was when I'd realised it had been 8 years since How to Be a Woman came out. Someone went, oh, you're coming up to a decade. And I was like, oh, that can't be true. And then I started reflecting on what had happened since the last book. And I was like, it feels like there's time for a sequel now. I'd always presumed I would do a sequel at some point, but I'd thought that it would be when I was 80, and most of it would be about the menopause and then dying, because I didn't know that there was this whole middle section, middle age, which is a completely different game from being either a young woman, or B, getting the menopause and then dying. And I was like, well, people don't write about the reality of this. I feel like the general sort of vibe is that when you get to middle age, you're just a kind of boring drudge. You're either a mum in a sitcom going, oh, Kevin, or you're a kick-ass boss who has 6 lines and then gets beaten by the younger girls in the office. And I realised that it's a completely different thing, in that all the stuff that I dealt with in How to Be a Woman was from teenage to sort of early 30s. What I thought was the difficult bit, working out who you are, working out your sexuality, working out what love is, having to deal with things like abortion and miscarriage and masturbation and periods. And I thought that I'd done all the hard bit, and that the next bit would be the easy bit, where I would suddenly lead an elegant life that would just be full of long lunches with gal pals. I'd probably wear linen trousers that didn't crease around the crotch, and just have a fine old time. And what I realised is that that's what not middle life is at all. When you're younger, you have the luxury of all your problems being your problems, just shit that you need to sort out. When you get to middle age, you realise that all your problems become other people's problems. You've got aging parents who are getting ill or confused or dying. You've got teenagers whose lives are exploding and is a full-time job in itself. You've got your friends who are going through divorce. And your job is to basically hold the threads of society together with your bare hands for no pay at all, because people do not have any sort of recognition of unpaid care and love, which tends to be the burden of the middle-aged woman. So I was like, yes, coming up to 10 years, got a lot to say. Let's get typing.
You really have got a lot to say as well. I mean, it is a love letter to sort of to being a mother, actually, and looking after your children. It is a love letter to your husband, who seems utterly charming and nice and kind and funny. And I love the chaos of your family life. And that's the opening chapter of everyone trying to get to school, and then your daughter leaving her lunchbox behind. I mean, it has got all that sort of brilliant chaos of middle age, and yet at the same time, it's sort of, you are sort of, I don't know, it's like you've got everyone else's problem and sort of saggy old neck at the same time.
Well, that's the thing, like, and the book very purposely, so the structure of it, it's 24 hours in the life of a woman. The structure of How to Be a Woman was a memoir told chronologically, and each sort of chapter would start with a little vignette of something that was happening in my life at that age, and then it would expand out to talk about a general problem or problems with feminism or being a woman. And after that was published, brilliantly, lots of people stole that format, and there are many books now which people have stolen that. And I was like, well, if I do the sequel, if I do that same format again, people might think I've ripped other people off rather than remembering it was me that invented it. So I need to come up with a new format. And I was really intrigued by the medieval book of hours, where each hour there's an hour dedicated to something. So if you're a woman, you wake up at 7 and you milk the goats, and then at 8 you pray, and then at 9 you wash the linen. And I was like, well, things haven't really changed much in the 21st century. In a middle-aged woman's life, you have to pack so much into each hour. And they can be either small, tiny, ridiculous things, like suddenly realising that you're growing a wattle and feeling sad about mortality, or huge things where you're literally trying to save people's lives. So I just love the idea of it just all being rammed into 24 hours, going from these huge things to these tiny things and back again, because that is what life is like in middle age. You go from huge drama to just little things like trying to keep your sex life going with your husband after 25 years, which we realised, my friend Sally Hughes invented this brilliant thing called the maintenance shag.
I love the maintenance shag. That's chapter 2. That's hilarious, because I thought you were like Jack Bauer. in 24. That's over. You're like, rather than some medieval woman. I thought you were Jack Bauer, literally. So I could hear the tick-tock going through.
I am so happy for that to be a description of the book, like a cross between the medieval Book of Hours and 24 with Jack Bauer. That is basically what it is to be a middle-aged woman, yes. And with the maintenance shag, which I've had so many people just kind of go, oh my God, yes. Because I think a lot of people who haven't read it think that the maintenance shag is a woman who has stopped wanting to have sex, lying back and gritting her teeth and thinking of England in order to maintain the relationship. And it's not that at all. It's the fairly common situation that both of you still want to have sex, but you're so busy and so burdened with all these things, it never happens spontaneously. And suddenly 3 months will have gone by and you're like, and it suddenly seems ridiculous that you ever did it. You're like, we used to do what? And you would say what? And then I don't think we did that. No. So you have to schedule it and do it. And for the first 5 minutes, you'll both be like, oh, this is weird. And then you remember what good fun times it is. Doesn't make you put on weight. It costs no money at all. And it makes you feel very chilled afterwards. And then often you have a spontaneous bog-off shag within 24 hours afterwards because you've remembered how great it is. So yeah, it's not about...
But what I also love about scheduling it in a sort of very banal, boring time of day, which is basically just after the children have gone to school, because if you go away for a romantic weekend, that is when you have a row.
Totally. Or because you're like the 3 sailors on shore leave on the town. You're like, we've just got this one day to do everything. And you have a list of all the things that you never normally get to do. So you're like, we could watch a whole film without being interrupted and go for a walk and have a splendid meal. And the last time we went away for a dirty weekend, we thought we'd watch a film first. And we stupidly chose Awakenings, the incredibly sad film with Robert De Niro and Robin Williams in, where Robert De Niro is trapped in his body because of a virus. And we cried so much that we couldn't have sex afterwards. So don't go away and try and ram it all into one weekend. There's clashes in your schedule. And just do one thing, 8:30 Friday, kids have gone to school, see if you can fit in a shag. That would be my advice.
But what is also fantastically brilliant about this book is that you take sort of everyday things that I just thought just happened to me, and they seem to be the every woman story. So, for example, I like there's a big riff you do on stair politics about the shit that's at the bottom of the stairs, and I mean, literally, you can see my stairs now. There's about 6 or 7 pairs of shoes, a couple of bags, some toothpaste, deodorant, all sitting there waiting to go up, but no one takes them up.
Exactly. And women look at that and go, that is stuff in category of to go upstairs. But you never go upstairs with empty hands. You walk past it and put it upstairs. All the women know this. I was tweeting about it last year. I was like, does everyone here know about the stairs system? All the women were like, yes, it's at the bottom of the stairs. It needs to go to the top. All the men were like, oh, is that what it is? I've just been stepping over that. Like, kind of, I nearly fell over last time. There was so much shit on the stairs. You're like, yes, it's waiting for you to take it up. Let me explain this to you now and stop half the divorces that are happening in this country.
It's so funny, but also things like, there's a brilliant bit when you talk about when you have a bath. and I'm thinking, oh, I recognise that. And I'm thinking, surely I must be the only person that happens to.
Well, I took such a huge risk with that. So when I was doing my live tours, sort of like, there'd always be sort of like bits where you'd be improvising and stuff. And one night I was like, you know what, I'm going to take a risk. I've not tested this on even any friends, but I can't believe it's just me. So the bath thing is where you have a bath, you have your lovely time, you get out, you dry, you get dressed. And then about 10 minutes later, suddenly, about 500 millimeters of lukewarm bath water come out of your flaneur. And you're like, how is that happening? Why have I never heard anybody talk about this? Like, is there a cure to it? And so I sort of said this on stage for the first time in front of 2,000 people. There was a silence for about 30 seconds where I was like, okay, it is just me. I'm a freak. And then every woman in the audience who, importantly, had a child all started laughing. All the younger women were like, what? And all the older women were like, okay, you've got that coming to you.
But it's so weird. So when you are doing a lot of things, like you've obviously got your very big girlfriends like Lauren's quoted in the book, Lauren Laverne, and you've got a big sort of gang of mates, which is mainly, lubricated by wine, gin, and weirdly, I think cups of tea at 11 o'clock, which slightly shook me. Actually, I was thinking, tea, okay, 11 o'clock.
In my group, I've always been the biggest boozer. There's usually the others have to come to me and go, okay, we're going to go home now, Kat, because you are now trying to invent cider mixed with Rioja, and that's not nice. But no, we've all found out, this is another thing no one tells you about middle age, because like, a big part about being younger is like, gin will cure everything. Like, you've had a hard week and that's your time away. And it feels to have like a sort of almost socio-political importance. Like, kind of, this is the point where I can show that I'm not just a mum anymore. I'm out, I'm having fun, I'm dancing, I'm drinking, I'm having my good times. That's the cure for all my ills. I get my one night out. And you get to your 40s and you're like, oh, I can't have that one night out anymore, because the hangovers suddenly become existential and crippling, and you are in bed for 2 days, you are full of fear, you play everything back in your head, and you just can't do it anymore. And you start realizing that just drinking tea is probably the answer as you get older. Something I never thought I'd say, and still upsets me to quite a great degree.
But do you workshop as many of your stories? I mean, there's a brilliant line in your book, for example, about the filthy dressing gown. Although I see you're in a very chic one today.
And cleaned, yes. So especially for you, my love. Popped it in the washing machine last night.
But you see, but that's what you say. I mean, I suddenly realised as I was reading it, I've never washed my dressing gown either.
Yes.
So do you workshop a lot of these things? Do you? I mean, do you?
Yes.
How do you get to all these stories that are so good and correct?
I have most of my time is spent. I've got a Facebook group with my 3 best girlfriends, Lauren Laverne, Sally Hughes, and Nadia Shireen, and we spend nearly all day talking on there. And so it's just every time anybody has a kind of, oh, is this just me thing, we're all just there talking about it. So yeah, I test it on them and make sure that sort of like it's not just me, it's at least 3 other people that I know. But a lot of it is also like, if anybody out there wants to be a writer, and I think I meet a lot of people who want to be writers, but like, I don't know what I'd write about. Like, it just seems there's so much, and like, what choices would I make? And I came to book writing and TV and movies quite late. I was sort of had 2 kids. I was in my 30s, because at the time I thought that I had to write stuff like the stuff that already existed. Like, if I was going to write a film, it would be Star Wars. It would be about a teenage boy and blowing up a Death Star and robots. And I was like, well, I don't have any stories like that, so I guess I'll never make a film. And then in my early 30s, I suddenly pivoted 180 degrees to the other side and went, oh, what's all the stuff that doesn't exist yet? What is taboo? What is secret? What are the kind of characters we don't see? What are the kind of situations we don't see? What are the problems that we don't see discussed? I need to start writing my list of stuff that isn't there yet. And then once you click into that, every day when you read the papers and you're arguing with something, or you're watching TV and going, oh God, not this kind of character again. Why don't they have anyone like, e.g. me or my friends? Then suddenly you've just got this list, and it never ends. Like, I could have made this book 3 times longer. And there definitely will be, I suspect that I'm probably going to do one every 10 years now, because the shit of being a woman never ends. There's always something to discuss.
Absolutely. And I think although a lot of the book is very funny and very accurate, it's also very brave, because you delve into things like your parents' divorce, and the chaos that was your brother coming to stay with you, which I particularly enjoyed. There seems to be a state of mind called being Andrew.
Do you know some Andrews in your life?
I do, slightly sort of not noticing anything. It's a sort of shuffling through, and I mean, there was a book that you talk about him not being able to clean a carpet, he just doesn't even understand about, feeding himself or washing himself, and his coat's filthy. The long leather coat made me laugh as well.
Yes, I had to Febreze frequently. Whenever he went out, I'd be like, quick, get the Febreze on it. I went through so much Febreze when he lived here. It was, at the beginning, when I sort of observed because he's my brother, and so we were brought up in the same place, and a lot of thought that I thought, oh, it might just be me. When I was watching him from the same DNA and the same background, the same family, just not seeing all these things. And I started to realize that it's not just a me and Andrew thing. This is a man and woman thing. Like, kind of, women are raised from day one to notice things, to multitask. The sort of the moment where I was like, oh, this is the difference, was in a newsagents at Penrith train station. And in the newsagents, they had women's lifestyle magazines. And in those magazines is everything. You pick up the average women's magazine, and it'll go from like, this is the right shoe and the right handbag, to this is how you campaign against female genital mutilation. This is how you report a rape. This is how you support a friend who's got cancer. So we are taught to do everything and to notice everything and to be experts at everything. Expert at blowjobs, expert at stain removal, like everything. And then on the other side is men's magazines, and they are under men's interests. And each of them is just a mono subject. It's either fishing or motorbikes or gaming. And this is how we raise people for, the agendas from a very early age. Women are supposed to have lives that are stylish, and we do everything. Men have one thing that they specialize in. And over the course of a life, as I get to 45, I can see the difference between this. Because like at this point in my life, and of all the women that I know, we feel like we're juggling a million plates, and it's exhausting. And the main thing that is crippling us is exhaustion and just not having enough time. And it means that we fall behind in our jobs because we still tend to take the majority of emotional labor and childcare and all this stuff. So this is the crunch point for us. This is the hardest bit. When you get older, though, and particularly as the genders go into retirement, women who've kept all these plates spinning then go on to have really interesting third acts. They've still got this social group, they've kept the family together, they've kept all these hobbies going, they start forming charities or going hill walking or learning to rumba. Men, having pursued this one interest that made them incredibly successful in their careers in sort of this age and sort of up to retirement, once the career is removed, have no hinterland. You know, they become lonely. They have no one to emotionally support them. They haven't curated all these hobbies, and they go into a decline. But you see this, particularly if you talk to any sort of age concerned charity, that's sort of like, you know, lonely old men who don't know how to look after themselves and haven't got a social circle. It's a huge phenomenon. So it all sort of pans out in the end. I'm just interested to see the different, you know, the things that we do from day one with our little boys, how that pans out over their entire lives, and similarly with girls. You know, and it's a very different experience. And we're so used to having the male experience chronicled, but not the female experience, which is that behind the doors of every suburban house in the Western world, women are coping with all this stuff and dealing with, we think it's humdrum and drudgery, but it's not. Women are saving souls and saving lives and keeping things going. And I just wanted to open the doors and shine a spotlight in and go, all the women who are dealing with this shit right now, I'm going to tell your story in the same way that we would tell a story of war or an epic ring quest in Mordor. Like, your lives are just as important and funny and heartbreaking and high stakes as men in big careers or, you know, going off and fighting battles. I'm going to tell your story now.
But you were brilliant. I completely agree with you. That's fascinating. And also you're brilliant about all the sort of women's magazines, all the lists and all those things that you're supposed to, you know, when you talk about, you know, how to do this. And also men didn't have those magazines like sort of Just 17 or Jackie or any of those magazines. Well, sadly, we don't have them anymore now. Sugar, all those mags, they've all gone. But you're most brave, and you probably know where I'm going, with your incredible story about your daughter and all her eating disorders and everything. And I wondered, that was obviously very painful to write, and I presume you got her permission to do it.
She told me to write about it. She's so for her generation, mental illness does not have the stigma it had for our generation. I was raised in a generation where all I knew about eating disorders was having watched the Karen Carpenter story, that movie, which just terrified me beyond any rational thought. And I just thought, if anybody I knew ever had an eating disorder, I wouldn't know how to deal with it. That's my ultimate nightmare. So karma being what it is, that is, you know, that's that. In the end, I had to face that biggest fear with my daughter. And she told me to write about it because she was like, my generation talk about it. We'll talk about it on social media. We see mental illness exactly the same as getting leukemia or a broken leg. It is ill luck. My generation still has this guilt around it, this shame around it. We presume that it's an error of parenting, that it would only happen to bad parents or bad families. And the facts are that 1 in 4 teenage girls will either get anxiety, depression, an eating disorder, or start self-harming. And it's everywhere. And I was very aware that having a bit of a public platform and being able to say, you know, I think you will think that generally I'm quite sort of well balanced and we would have a warm and open family. But the fact that it's happened to even us, I will tell you my story, and hopefully it will take some of the shame and stigma away. And the response, we serialised it in the Times a couple of weeks ago, was phenomenal. And I had so many people that I know or know of contacting me going, yeah, we've been dealing with this for 5 years and we've not been able to tell anyone, but I now feel that I can talk about it. And my daughter was very firm. She was like, my generation are dealing with this the best we can, but you're our carers and you are fucking this up. There are mistakes that you make because of your problems that make it harder for us to recover. And I detail them all in the book. I thought that you could parent your way out of mental illness. So if, as a parent, if you have a child that's doing something that is harmful to them or wrong, you try incentives, like, you know, eat your food and we'll go and, you know, go for a day out at the zoo. You can't give an incentive to a child with an eating disorder. That's their biggest fear. They don't.
What are we supposed to do then? I mean, because what's interesting is it starts out in your book as something so incredibly, imperceptibly tiny. She just starts getting faddy about things, and then she eventually she goes from not eating certain things to not eating meat, and then not eating. It's basically shutting down options, is what it is, isn't it? Yes. So by the end, she'll only have a very specific sort of vegan cheese that you have to go out and buy at 10 o'clock at night. But she's basically just shutting down her food source. But as a parent, you see that and it starts so slowly you don't even notice it.
Yes, no, totally. Just like forgetting the packed lunch, that's there in the first chapter. She forgets her packed lunch, and then she's too busy. She's running out the door, and you give her a breakfast bar, but then you find them in the bag uneaten. Well, one of the things that I've really realised is that, particularly in the teenage years when they're modulating from child to adult, and they're starting to deal with adult problems, is if they don't have the language to talk about it to you, they will start communicating in other ways. So an eating disorder is a communication. They're going, I can't talk to you about this, but I'm going to do something that shows the truth, which is I am very distressed. And my biggest fault as a parent was that I couldn't deal with sadness. I was raised in a family where you just didn't be sad. You just put on a brave face and cracked on. And so every time she was presenting me with evidence of her sadness, she was communicating with me, I am sad, I am stressed, I am unhappy. I would just be like, well, I'll just cheer you up. I will do jolly things. I'll buy you some pet rats and we'll play buckaroo. Or I would reason her out of it, sit down and give her these TED Talks like, nutrition is important and all of these things, and not do the key thing that it took me 2 years to realize, which is what you have to do with any child in distress. Recognize they are communicating with their actions and go, I see your problem. I'm naming it. You are sad and unhappy and distressed. I see that. I'm not scared of it. I love you, whatever happens, and we're going to deal with it together, and give them the language to start being able to communicate with you. And that's when they don't feel that they need to do these actions anymore to communicate with you. You are finally managing to communicate. But it's hard because you're talking about, mental health is such a difficult subject to talk about and to know how to deal with. And also you're dealing with the child now as an adult rather than the child that they were when they entered into this illness. So much of it is down to knowing how to communicate with them, and you having to set the tone and go, this is the language we will use. These are the acknowledgements we will make. This is how we will help you through it. And she is thankfully now wholly recovered and just better than ever. And I know what the stats are on eating disorders. It's roughly 30%. Will make a complete recovery. 30% will make a partial recovery. So they'll still probably be quite orthorexic and picky, but they'll be functional. And 30% remain ill or die. It has the highest mortality rate of any psychiatric illness. And even though I'm aware that our story is a lucky 30%, and then that's unrepresentative of the general situation, I wanted there to be one positive story out there, because every book that I read in the middle of it for any kind of hope, they all ended badly. And the one thing you really need when you're going through that as a family is just at least one story where it ended well and you've got some hope. You are so desperate to read something happy and positive. So yeah, she's my hero for saying that we should write about it. It's an extraordinary thing that she's done. And
I agree with you. And did you research other people's stories at the same time? Did you? I mean, how heavily down the rabbit hole did you go in writing that storyline in the book?
Well, I mean, it had all been
storyline that's facts in the book.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, it had all been researched by living through it. So, like, as soon as we knew that, she definitely did have an eating disorder, we were in contact with various charities, including Beat, who are amazing. I was talking to friends and sending her to see psychiatrists and psychologists that could explain a lot about it. I found out that within my social group, fully a third of the people that I knew were also dealing with it. So I knew the general overview. We were going to all the meetings at the hospital and getting all this advice. So it's lived experience. And you become, when your kid's ill, you become an expert in everything that's wrong with them. You read everything you can get your hands on. So I was very aware of the arena that we're in, and that the main problem is funding. Even when you acknowledge your child has an eating disorder and they want to go and get help, you will have to wait a minimum of 6 months, a year, 18 months to get that help. And that's torture. And that's simply down to funding. There is not enough funding in mental health. And if you're telling a child, at that age, a year and a half of your life waiting for help seems like a decade. And so much can change in that time while you're still waiting for help. So the only positive bit of help that I managed to find in that time while we were waiting was an amazing book by an author called Eva Musby that's called, I think, Coping with Anorexia. And she gives you scripts of what to say. So when you have a child with an eating disorder, they will do everything they can to argue with you and fight. It's like they are possessed, and they will scream at you. They want, the eating disorder in their head wants to argue with you. It wants a confrontation. And in the heat of the moment, when you've got a distressed, angry child screaming at you, you often don't know what to say, or you say the wrong thing. These are scripts. You just read the scripts out loud to them, and they work. They're incredibly effective. So if anyone out there is dealing with this at the moment, first of all, my hugest love to you and the biggest hug of solidarity ever. And secondly, check out that Eva Musby book. It might be the thing, but we'll help you through this time.
That's amazing. Did it impact on your other children? the idea, I mean, she must have, not to be rude or anything, stolen quite a lot of the oxygen out of the family. It must be quite hard to have a sister going through that when you're equally as important within the group.
Oh, hugely, and going through her teenage years as well. And part of my ill daughter's, part of her problem was being incredibly guilty about the amount of time and attention that she was taking up, and that just puts her into a spiral. So that's a huge balancing act. Yeah, I mean, it got really brutal and shitty. Like, they're not years that I would ever want to live through again, because I was just constantly having to say to my other daughter, I'm so sorry, I've just got to be with her. I've got to stay with her in her bed tonight. I've got to take her to hospital tomorrow. And she would want to talk about what was happening in her life, and I'd be like, I'm sorry, at the moment, you're just going to have dad, like, because I'm over here on this project, but I promise you when this is all over, we will reconnect again. Like, I'm still here, but we've just got to get through this family thing together. And it was really tough for her. She's so brave and magnanimous about it now. But yeah, the after effects last for years. It took, it was a good 2 years after my daughter got better, but the relationship with my other daughter was able to become normal again, because we just had a lot of trauma to deal with. It was horrible.
Yeah, I bet. You don't have a son, so I was wondering whether you think we bring up sons and daughters in different ways. Because I've got one of each, and I can see the difference in one's attitude. As a mother, I think you're much more critical of your daughter than you are your son.
Because
and I don't know why that is.
Well, because the world would be more critical of your daughter. Like, kind of part of what you're doing as a parent is kind of, you love them and have a relationship with them, but you're also aware that you are often a proxy for the outside world, and you need to prepare them for a world that will be judgmental and unkind based on their gender, and will expect them to be able to do these things. And it's finding a way to sort of parlay that and make them realize, yeah, you are going to be judged unfairly compared to men, so I need to prepare you for that. Like, we can talk about the long game, which is to bring about a matriarchy and prove that there is true equality and have feminism rule across the world. But in the short term, the reality that you will be dealing with is, if you go out dressed like that, you will be judged. If you post that on your social media, you will be judged. Let's have a conversation about that.
Oh yes, there's an awful thing in your book about being ugly on social media, which I'm so related to. That's just awful. And being ugly. I'm a bit older than you, but being ugly when we were younger didn't really matter that much. You were just ugly, and you look shit in a couple of photographs, and nobody cared. But now, I mean, thousands of people look at them.
Well, also because there were only a couple of photographs. There's
exactly.
probably 20 photographs of me in existence before the age of 20, whereas now they're constantly photographing and filming themselves. Like, you are just more aware of your own face, for better or for ill. And but at the same time, I mean, I often wonder, because I didn't have a boy, but like, I think in many ways it is harder to be a boy, because at least girls do have feminism. Like, kind of, they have other women. That whole thing we were talking about before about women, creating networks and sort of, emotional stuff, and that we're so good at dealing with. Because we've got feminism, there's no problem a girl can have that she can't go online and find someone somewhere else has dealt with that same amount of shit. They have gone, it's not just your fault, this is a societal thing, I will name it, we're all going to talk about it together, and we're going to do something to change it. And similarly, there is so much culture that is uplifting for women now. Like, just the entire back catalogue of Beyonce is a celebration of women. Same with Rihanna. You've got Lizzo out there with her body positivity. So as a girl, you can spend all day watching brilliant films like Booksmart and listening to amazing songs by Lizzo and feeling good about being a girl and feeling part of a pack and a movement that is getting better. There is still so much shit for women, but I think we would all agree that things are getting better for our daughters and will be even better for our granddaughters. That is not the same for boys. Like, boys have no progress. Boys have no network. Boys have no way of being able to say, this is a problem of being a boy. Has anyone else got this problem? Let us identify it and name it and do something positive. There are no positive songs about being a boy. All the songs about being a bloke are just, it's like The Boys Are Back in Town by Thin Lizzy. It's like, that's not going to help you through a nervous breakdown. I've got to work out how to do a jailbreak. Like, kind of, that's not useful for me. So that's why a couple of the chapters in the book, which a couple of people have been like, oh, why is she worrying about the problems of men? Like, kind of like she's one of those feminists who like pretends to be like in the boys gang and like kind of she's betraying women. No, we occupy the planet together. We're all going to be mingling with each other, working with each other, having sex with each other, giving birth to each other. We've got to understand that there is gender-related bullshit for boys. Suicide is still the highest cause of death for men under the age of 50. And gender-related bullshit for girls. 1 in 4 girls will be raped. Let's talk about all these problems together, because a lot of them are interconnected. Men feel that they can't talk about their emotions because that's a female thing. And so it'd be bad for men to talk about their emotions, because to do something that's female is to do the thing that is of the lesser, less powerful gender. So there's a stigma around it. So that obviously feeds into feminism. If women were truly equal and seen as powerful role models and heroes, then it would be more acceptable for boys to do girl things. So they're all interconnected, and you've got this one thing that one of the big things in my feminism that I've realized in the last 10 years, that when you're talking about feminism, very often you're talking about everybody, and you need to make sure that you are talking about everybody.
Yeah, well, we are all in this together, I suppose, is that hackneyed old phrase, but it's absolutely true.
Sure.
I've got so many things I wanted to ask you, but just the Women's Union, I'm obviously joining that.
Yes.
That's brilliant. I should be signing on to the dotted line with that. I also wanted to ask you, you've got a film coming out of your previous book, How to Be a Woman, and you've got Beanie Feldstein playing you.
Beanie Feldstein, yeah. So it's on, you have to pay for it on Amazon at the moment, but I think it's going on to general release, because obviously we were going to have a theatre release for it. But then Corona came along, and obviously the very worst thing that happened during the entire global pandemic was that my film didn't get shown in the cinema. So we're on Amazon Prime now, and I think it gets general release in a couple of months' time. And that was a joy. So when I wrote How to Build a Girl, it's based on my teenage years, in that unusually I became a 16-year-old journalist, and I had a national platform in a magazine to talk about my opinions. And I started off as a fan of pop music and celebrating these bands and loving it. And then it was rapidly made clearer to me by the older, cooler boys at the magazine that that's not what you're supposed to do as a rock critic. You're supposed to destroy bands and be horrible to them, basically, and bully the majority of them for not being as cool as them. So I did that for a bit. And then it reached its peak when I did a review of a band called Ned's Atomic Dustbin from Stourbridge, whom I imagined I was at their funeral, and I was the vicar giving a eulogy, and I was throwing earth onto their dead faces whilst telling them what a waste of life their entire career had been. And the man who is now my husband, who worked at the same magazine as me, just came up to me and went, "That's a bit off." And it was the only time I'd ever had some notes on my writing. And I was like, yeah, he's right. I came here as a fan, and why have I turned into this? So I then made it my life's work to stop being a dick and be nice again. So we made it into a film, even though it seems like a period piece about a girl in the 90s becoming a rock critic and meeting all these stars and stuff, becoming a bit of a bitch and then realizing that's not a good idea. It's also incredibly, the reason I really wanted to make it as a film is it's incredibly relevant to now, because now every 16-year-old in the world has a platform in which they can talk about their opinions, and exactly the same thing happens. You start off on social media going, here's a picture of me being cute with my dog, and here's my breakfast, and hurrah for life. And then some troll will have a go at you and go, well, you look fat and your breakfast is shit and problematic. And then you start attacking back, and then suddenly you're part of a platform where everybody's slagging everybody off. And at some point you have to go, I don't want to do this. I'm a young woman, and I want to be positive and optimistic about life and communicate with love and fairness and joy. So that was the idea of the film, just like, let's show, even though it seems like this very niche period story, it's actually the story of every adolescent in the world at the moment. Then the big decision, are you going to be a dick or not? In the culture wars, are you going to be a dick or not? And my suggestion is, don't be a dick. It doesn't work out well for anyone else, and it really doesn't work out well for you either.
But it's fantastic, and you've got Beanie playing you, which must be really exciting. Did you do the adaptation as well?
I did, yes. I'd never written a script before, so that was exciting. When I wrote my sitcom, Raised by Wolves, with my sister, then in every writing partnership, apparently it's traditional that one person will pace around the room being inspired and shouting, write that down! And there'll be one person who's typing. And you would think the power was that the powerful person would be the one walking around going, write that down! And the typer's just a typer. It's not the case. If you're the typer, you have the power. Because I'd be saying all these things, and then I'd look at the page and I'd be like, you didn't put any of my great ideas down. And she'd be like, no, because they were shit. So this was the first time I'd ever been the typer and written all my ideas down. So yeah, I didn't know how to use the software or anything. It was, I didn't know how to do a plot. I'd show it to a friend in the end, John Niven, who wrote Kill Your Friends, and go, this doesn't work. Why doesn't this work? And he was like, well, your characters are funny, your dialogue is funny, but I'm on page 40 and they're still in the front room. Nothing has happened. Here's the only thing you need to know about a screenplay. Things need to happen on every page. And I was like, oh, right, okay, now I know everything. And Beanie Feldstein was just a joy. We cast her off the back of her being in Lady Bird. And it was hard casting, because the role was of a 16-year-old girl who's like starts off as really clever and funny, but very innocent, a virgin, and a big girl, plaits, shabby clothes, goes to London, reinvents herself as this kind of sexual pirate, becomes a massive bitch, and then goes through this revelation. And it's very hard to find an actress who can do that in every scene. And but when we saw Beanie in Lady Bird, we cast her, and she is just a phenomenon. She's like, when she walks into a room, she's already not just an actress, she's a thing. Like, people believe in her. You look at her Instagram feed and it feels like a feed from the future, where the world is full of big, brilliant, gorgeous, talented girls who are just really happy and only want to spread sunshine. And as far as I know, she's the only one who's done that. And I'm like, yes, let's have more of those. She is the future. More women like this. That's evolution.
It's so exciting. I'm desperate to see it, because that book sold so well. I mean, you were in 16 countries, 500,000 copies. I mean, it's amazing, and this one is doing equally as well.
Yes, it was. We came out on Super Thursday, which everybody talked about. Like, it was
what a hell of a time to come out! Yeah.
Yeah, so this was like, so all of the big books that were supposed to come out during the summer were delayed because of Corona. So they all came out on Super Thursday. And so I was up against, and normally we'd plan it so that, like, I'd got a fair run at number one. Because so far all my books have gone to number one. And I was like, I would like that to continue. They were like, that's not going to happen because you've got Ant and Dec. You've got Ant Middleton from SAS. Are You Tough Enough? All these big guys who've got TV shows. So we managed 5. It's still top 10. I'm sad it wasn't number one, but that I'm aware that is the tiniest problem anyone's ever had. Like, there isn't a violin small enough to be played.
There's still the paperback.
Right, exactly. I'll gun for that.
The paperback. Caitlin, listen, thank you so much for talking to us today. You've been absolutely unbelievable. I could sit here all afternoon.
Oh, me too. Well, I've still got my Jimmy Jams on, so as far as I'm concerned, this has just been a lovely chat in bed before we get to the main thing. So, yeah. Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, darling. It really is.
Foreplay.
Exactly. It was conversational foreplay. Let's get through to the big chat bumming now.
Bye, my lovely. Thank you so much.
Take care, baby. Bye-bye.